got one more talk, though, to go before the break, and in a minute I'm going to invite John to come up on stage. So, John Topper, I have a bit of an apology and a confession, I'm afraid, because the first time I met John was when I was moderating a panel event for CTO Craft Bites, which is all about boring technology. So now, every time I've met him since, I go, John, boring. So, sorry. So that is the first thing I think when I see you. But yes, please welcome on stage John Topper, who's going to do his talk, Keeping Up with AI.
Well, throwing the microphone on the floor, which is an excellent start. Good morning. Have you noticed recently that everyone seems to be losing their fucking minds about AI? These are actual headlines I found on the internet from news articles in the last couple of years about what AI will do, what it will disrupt, what it will achieve. And I want to believe, because I'm a geek, and AI is kind of it looks like magic, and it's pretty exciting, and I really want it to do all the things that we're saying it will, other than maybe cause the singularity and the Terminator event and that sort of thing. Let's stay away from those things. But I think it'd be difficult to argue that we're not at this point in the hype cycle where we're like right at the top, the peak of inflated expectations, and we are heading towards, or will be heading towards, the trough of disillusionment. And as a cynic, as well as someone who wants to believe, this is what I'm largely expecting. Good morning, I'm John. Up until recently, I was the CTO at the Scale Factory. I founded the business 16 years ago. I sold it to a larger consultancy called 1010 in November. And my background originally was systems administration. I'm going to let you soak in that image. You may recognize us from such conversations as, no, you can't do that, go away, until Patrick and the DevOps movement taught us how to talk to people like they were actual human beings. And when we did that, I think we figured out that often what we meant by no, go away was, yes, but sorry, we need to think about all of these concerns before we put it into production tomorrow like you planned. And today, I think most CTOs are cognizant of these considerations when it comes to rolling out software. 16 years ago when I started the business, I don't think that was the case. I'm not claiming to have changed that personally, but I think most CTOs now are much more operationally aware than they might have been in the past. And so I think the existence of a hype cycle, hype now I see as a signal. I see it as a signal that we, as people in a strategic role, should be asking questions like this. For example, will this new technology have an impact on our business specifically? Positive impact, that is, I should add. Should we adopt that technology in order to benefit from that impact? And if we do that, how should we do that safely? So when we're talking about AI, as many people are this week, as it turns out, I'm hoping not to cover some of the same ground. Let's just define what we're talking about. I'm not talking about things like facial recognition. This is classical AI. It's fairly well understood. It's been around for a long time. It's operationally mature, I think. There are services you can consume with it and use today. We're not really going to cover that. Same with things like recommendation engines. The piece of software that once you've bought a big, expensive television from Amazon is used to recommend that maybe you'd like to buy a big, expensive television. Never quite understood why that's how it works. But we're not talking about that either. We are, of course, talking about large language models. And when we're talking about the hype cycle and all those AI headlines, most people are thinking, I think, about generative AI rather than sort of traditional AI. So what I'm hoping to cover today is how to keep up with the three facets of the topic. We're going to talk about models. We're going to talk about the security of AI workloads, and we're going to talk about regulation, because everybody loves a bit of regulation on a Tuesday morning. So, you're laughing. Why are you laughing? Keeping up with model development is the first topic, and I think today, if you're building SaaS, show of hands, who's building SaaS today or as part of a SaaS business? That's a lot of you. We work primarily with SaaS businesses over the last few years, and I think it's probably true that if you're building SaaS, you'll have had the opportunity to kick the tires on AI-related features in some degree. That screen keeps going black. I'm going to walk over to this one where I can actually read it. And I think when we're talking about AI in SaaS, a lot of the type of experimentation that we're seeing and the type of features that people are building are these kind of customized content generation. This is what LinkedIn uses to suggest what you might like to write to somebody before you delete it and write your own text instead. Content summarization and scoring. I know people like Internet.io and Intercom and those sorts of businesses are using LLMs to summarize text quite effectively in their workloads. Conversational interfaces, so the chatbots that people are using instead of letting you talk to a human about your technical support problems, and natural language querying, where if you've got an interface that allows you to examine data in some fashion, providing a mechanism by which you can ask the data questions using the English language rather than learning some esoteric querying tool. And also, I think we're seeing people playing with autonomous AI agents, but I think I'm seeing a bit less of this for the most part. So most of you who are building AI applications for your SaaS products, it's going to look a bit like this, sort of massively simplified. I'm sorry to talk down to you, but typically your application code is making a request of the large language model, using a prompt. That prompt is typically English in some fashion, and your app will be dealing with customer data in your database. So this is this sort of straightforward API calls, and we all know what API calls look like. Ask a question, get a response, much like any other API. Evolving that a little bit, there is a possibility that your data or your customer's data will also end up being used in this prompting somewhere. So you might, for example, build a vector store of data from your customer database, interpreted using an embeddings model, and that will be used as part of the prompt as well. You might fine-tune a model with your data, although typically that's not a good place to start, as I understand it. So there's a sort of, we're introducing risk here, right? We've got customer data involved here as well. And any time that you're using an API, you should be thinking about these sorts of things. I'm sure you all are, because you're grown-up people, right? Thinking about things like security and authentication, considerations of tenancy, so if you've got multiple customers keeping their data apart from each other, scalability, health checking, service level agreements, all this grown-up operational stuff. And I don't think in the AI landscape, this is any different. We are using APIs, we should be thinking about these considerations. But things get a bit weird when we start thinking about functional testing of these things. In the sort of traditional world, if you like, testing is typically about asserting that if you give a function or a method a set of inputs, you get the same outputs every time. And that's the thing that you're testing for. 2 + 2 always equals 4 in this world. But when you start looking at the use of language models in your products, things are a little different, because the responses that you get from the models are not necessarily deterministic. And if you're doing things that involve summarizing text, how do you know whether what you've just gone out of the model is correct? What does correct mean in this case? Here I've got 2 pieces of text that the result of asking both ChatGPT and Claude to summarize a PDF image or a PDF file which contained the Wikipedia page about the Apple TV show Severance, which you should all be watching, by the way. And these are both objectively correct. They are summaries of that page. If you were to put this in some kind of classical testing approach, I don't know how you would validate that one was right, one was not, or how correct they were. So when we're looking at the results that come out of these models, what we need to be thinking about is essentially evaluation and scoring. You can't say correct, not correct. These are the sort of dichotomy doesn't exist. That binary isn't fair in this world. And the approaches that are recommended for doing this are around scoring the results, either using open source benchmarking, so that there are benchmarks that test or will score outputs against particular types of work. You might choose a benchmark that matches your workload pretty well. You might task another large language model with analyzing the textual output of the model and scoring it or feeding back on correctness. And you might, in fact, use actual human beings to do this. The business that just acquired mine has a large history of testing and quality engineering. There are people around who could be doing that sort of thing. But you see, it's a bit more difficult. But why do we need to care about this to that extent? Well, This is a timeline since April of model releases. You can see this is going pretty quickly, right? We're in fever pitch at the moment, and there are new models released all the time. And you should, if you're building software that uses LLMs, you should be considering testing new models as they become available, because they might do a better job, or they might be cheaper than the one that you are currently using. Even in the sort of fever pitch dreams of the early 2010s, when there were new key value stores appearing all the time, I would never be advocating for, test the new database and see whether you should move all your data to the new database. That would never be a thing I'd recommend. But in this model world, I think you probably need to be looking at that kind of thing. Models benchmark differently. Different models have different strengths. You need to choose a model that suits your particular use case. This is a benchmark from a website called artificialanalysis.ai. It just benchmarks models that are available in Amazon Bedrock. I'm going to talk about Bedrock in a second. And this is giving it an intelligence score. You can see Claude 3.7 Sonnet is doing particularly well there. 3.5 Sonnet not far behind that. Pretty good. But if you also look at the cost implications, this is the cost per token, or the number of dollars per 1 million tokens. And those two high-performing models that we've just talked about are up here at $6 per million tokens, whereas down the bottom there, Nova Micro, which is a model released by AWS at the end of last year, dirt cheap. And I think probably Amazon's approach with Nova is going to be to aim at the lower price point, and they might well win as a result of that, I think. So the two things need to be considered in combination. If you're kicking the tires on AI features in your product right now, and you are using one of these expensive models, that might be fine in prototype, but if usage scales up and starts being meaningful, you're going to be looking at the cost of it pretty quickly. And so you need to be able to think about swapping between models. Quick digression on Amazon Bedrock. Anna and Pat have both talked about sort of finding the things that are strengths for you or that spark joy. If you follow me on LinkedIn, and you should, then you'll know that one of the things that sparks joy for me is taking the piss out of Amazon for things. We're an AWS partner. They annoy me a lot, but I'd like to tell you how it is, essentially. And so you might be surprised to hear me today talk positively about an Amazon product in that case. But the graphs I showed you before are we're all models that are available through Bedrock. That's why OpenAI's ChatGPT wasn't on there. You can't buy that through Amazon for various competitive reasons. Bedrock is a managed AWS service providing generative AI models for use and a bunch of tooling around that. And today it supports these models. In fact, I had to update this slide this morning because in the last 24 hours, DeepSeek R1 is now available on the Bedrock platform. Quick show of hands, how many of you are running some kind of generative AI workload, either in production or in a sort of preview model? Okay, very good. Keep your hands up if you're on AWS today doing that. And keep your hand up if you're doing that on Bedrock. Some things, yeah. Okay. It's my view that if you're building AI and most of your platform is on AWS, you should probably be looking at Bedrock. If you're making these requests against other external third-party APIs, that might be a mistake from a security perspective, if nothing else. And I'm hoping to convince you that there are some other features as well. So keeping up with model development, I think investing in model and prompt evaluation is going to be necessary. And it's harder than just, is the output of this correct? Because that's not how these things work. We need to be able to continuously evaluate these things. I think you're going to be evolving your prompting as well as the models evolving. Even if you stay on the same model name, you might move model versions and the outputs will be different. So you need to build muscle around testing these the outputs of these things and comparing them to decide which one you want to go with ultimately. And you should optimize for change, essentially. Make it easy to switch models. I think the main thing that DevOps movement taught us as sysadmins was that we couldn't just say, no, we've deployed that, now we're going to leave it the hell alone. That's not how operations works. Optimizing for change is one of the things that I think we learned in that sort of, in the last 16 years, I guess. Now let's talk about security. Security is, in my experience, when I talk to CTOs about security or I run roundtable events or something like that, security conversations are really popular because I think a lot of CTOs are afraid of the implications of being bad at security and don't know what good looks like, typically. And it's an interesting topic. People like to talk about it. So let's talk about the security of this landscape. There are new threats to consider, as with any new technology, and there are new things that could be insecure about it. There are attacks on prompt, so you can make a request of a model that makes it ignore its safeguards and does things that it shouldn't be allowed to do. You can inject malicious instructions into a model and have that not caught by the security tooling that the model provides. And there are also data privacy concerns. If you're building retrieval augmented generation systems and you're storing customer data either in those or fine-tuning them into your models, there is a risk that the data that you've put in there could be surfaced by prompting attacks of some sort. And I'm also going to flag rogue agents here. In the current landscape, when we talk about agentic AI, we're talking about essentially systems that are able to control third-party pieces of software, such as making API calls on your behalf or making web requests, and that's terrifying to me, frankly. That's a threat that we might need to think about. What I think I've seen in the market is that the security of these things is fairly undifferentiated. It doesn't change based on your business landscape particularly, and it doesn't change particularly across the models that you might choose to use. And architecturally, for me, when I see undifferentiated, what I think is let's give that to somebody else. Let's buy a tool that does that, because the tool will evolve and I don't have to worry too hard about it. I hand over my money, I get some security, and I can sleep a bit more easily at night. So in the AWS world, Bedrock provides a set of guardrails, and these apply to every model that AWS ship. They are part of the architecture on the way into the prompt. They're also part of the architecture on the way out with the result. And these allow you to filter topics and do sort of checking of correctness to some extent, notwithstanding what we've already said about how difficult correctness is to assess. So you can, for example, filter out for hate, insults, sexual content, violence, and misconduct, or what I call Twitter now. You can turn that on in Bedrock, and that will just filter out those responses. It will refuse to return a result if the LLM has generated hate speech or sexual content. You can also, if you're working in one of the regulatory industries, you might be working with private information, so names, addresses, credit card numbers, account numbers, medical records, and so forth. And with Bedrock, you can turn on filters such that either the prompt or the model won't return content that has these PII types that you've identified in it, or it can mask out that in the results, and so it'll return a result, but then the information is filtered out. There's also something called a contextual grounding check, which is useful when you're using a reference source of some kind, either retrieval augmented generation or if you're summarizing text. And the contextual grounding check is a way, I believe AWS are using other LLMs to do this testing, and it's looking to check whether the result that you're getting from the model is factually accurate based on the information that you've given it, and that the result is relevant to the question that you've asked, both of which you would like to expect, I think, from your request. Instead of having to build this tooling yourself, it's part of Bedrock across all the models available. I had a quick look at guardrails for the OpenAI suite, because I sort of expected to see something similar there. But as far as I can tell, the answer is here are some Python snippets, go build it yourself, which probably isn't desirable in the security realm. And briefly about agents, this is essentially a mechanism by which your AI tooling can arbitrarily execute code, and so you should probably treat it accordingly, probably like you would treat your least trained junior developer, with kid gloves around the inputs and outputs, and probably a really tight security model around what the agent is capable of doing. So from a security perspective, I think it's important to adopt third-party security tooling. I don't think you should build security tooling yourself in this case. I don't think there's any business value in doing that, unless you're an AI security company, in which case, go for it. Come and talk to me about it. I'd like to know what you're doing. And implement guardrails around your models so that you can protect your business reputation from the things that these models could spit out that are bad in some way. So regulation. I've got 6 minutes on this. It's a big topic, but Let's see how we get on. There are relevant standards. If you're building platforms today, or you're handling any kind of data for your customers, which I think you probably all are, then there are some standards that you're already going to be paying attention to. GDPR being the big one, UK GDPR in this country, all about consent to collect data, security of its handling, and how you keep a record of its processing operations. None of that changes in the AI world particularly. But there's also ISO 27001, which is a risk-based approach. There is an AI Act from the EU, which covers certain types of AI workloads. And there is a proposed regulation bill in the House of Lords right now in the UK. Let's take a quick look at that. I think in the ISO landscape, a lot of the risk assessment you've already done as part of ISO to look at the risks around storing customer data, processing customer data, using external APIs and so forth. A lot of that will still hold. I think a lot of it is still relevant. But I think if I were looking at this myself and building my risk profile out, the new risks that this brings that I would look at are intellectual property violation. So these models have clearly been trained on stolen work, so I don't think there's any controversy about that today. And you probably want to make sure that you're protected from the implications of that in your own business if the models you're using are spitting out other people's content. I would, some of the guidelines all seem to be about transparency and auditability, and this is tricky actually in the AI world, and so I would be looking at the risks around that. Bias and inaccuracies. I think bias creeps into any model that's been trained on a large amount of data, and so there'll be risks in relation to that. And accidentally getting data out of your system as a result of prompting is a risk that I would be worried about as well. In the EU AI Act, if you're selling to customers in the EU, or you are based in the EU, then you are obliged to follow these rules. I don't know if that's been made clear to you. If you're a director of the business that you're CTO of as well, it's a legal obligation for you personally. So you might want to check that out. And that separates AI workloads out into different risk levels. They call out specifically unacceptable risks. So these are systems that you just shouldn't build. You're not allowed to build them. Unless I think it's for national security or defense purposes, in which case there's a little bit of a loophole for that. But using AI for manipulation and deception, social scoring, predicting or assessing individual criminal offenses, like the pre-crime stuff, great. Biometric categorization to deduce certain protected characteristics. All of these you just cannot build if you are using or building systems for the EU. High-risk systems, you are obliged to do other things around safety and trust. So if you are, for example, scoring exams with your software, you're sorting CVs, you're credit scoring, you are automatically examining visa applications and those sorts of things, you are obliged to risk assess the things that you're building. You need to make sure that the data sets that you're using are high quality to minimize the risk of discrimination. You need to log activity and ensure the traceability of the results. You need to provide detailed documentation, providing information about how the system is built so that the authorities can go and look at it for compliance. You need to provide clear and adequate information to the people deploying these systems. There need to be human oversight measures, and you need a high level of robustness, cybersecurity, and accuracy. So if you're doing any of those things, and they don't seem like really outlandish things, like scoring CVs seems like the sort of thing, if you've built an ATS, that's the first product feature you build with AI. You have to be quite careful about how you're doing it if your customers are in the EU. And then for other systems where there is limited risk, you're obliged to tell your customers where AI is being used. For example, if you're talking to a chatbot, you've got to tell the customer you're talking to a chatbot. It's usually clear because they seem really dumb, but that might change over time, hopefully changes over time. And you must label AI-generated content as AI-generated content. In the UK, the bill in the House of Lords is sort of it's a bill proposing that everybody thinks about a proper plan. So it's a little bit earlier in conception than the EU model. But the proposal from the Lords is that companies are obliged to designate an AI officer, someone who's responsible for AI in the business, to disclose the use of AI systems, to ensure that they're fair and accountable, to mitigate bias, to clearly label AI products and services, and to comply with IP and copyright requirements. So there's a lot of overlap there with the EU law. In the US, there's no legislation at all currently. I think that there are about 140 bills currently being considered, but I don't imagine it's a priority for them right now because they're too busy ripping their country apart. Sorry, no politics here. But many of the bills seem to be covering much of the same topics, right? It's safety, it's about removing bias, it's about transparency and so forth. So my recommendation then is that in order to keep up with regulation, this stuff, it is a fast-moving space regulatorily as well as technologically. You should be thinking about the risks relating to generative AI in your risk model. If you're not thinking in terms of risk as a business, it's really time you start, in fairness. And if you'd like to talk about how that looks at a board level, do come and talk to us. You should probably read and understand the EU Act. Right now, it probably applies to you. So if you're building AI products and your customer base is in the EU or you are based in the EU, you need to understand that and start implementing. And keep an eye on the UK and US situations. But my view is that if you start doing the things that the EU obliges of you, you'll cover the rest of them eventually when those rules come out as well. So that's the summary. For models, I think it's all about investing in evaluation and continuously evaluating and working towards capability for change in that landscape. From a security perspective, I think it's time to adopt third-party security tools and to implement guardrails for your models. In the regulation landscape, I think you should be thinking about risk. Around that, you need to look at the EU Act and keep an eye on what's happening in other parts of the world as well. Scale Factory is an AWS consulting partner. We've paid to talk to you today. As it turns out, we've got a stand downstairs. We largely work with SaaS businesses, but we work on other types of work as well, strong migrations practice and so forth. We are currently building AI products with some of our customers, which is pretty exciting. And if you would like the opportunity to win a Remarkable today, do visit our stand and talk to myself or Kyle or Tom. And if you'd like to talk about any of the things that I've talked about today, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation about them with you. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for questions.
No time for questions. Brilliant. I've escaped. Thank you.
So yeah, all I can think of myself is, so I've got the heart of a sysadmin up on stage talking to us about regulatory compliance. So yes, definitely shaking that boring image, John. Well done. Right, if it does get a bit peoply out there, just remember there is a quiet zone as well that you can go find. If you don't know where it is, ask the info desk, they'll point you to it. I used it a couple of times yesterday. It's very chill, you'll love it. Otherwise, go check out the vendors, check out the competitions, grab a coffee courtesy of T5, and we're kicking back off at 11. The conversations for session kicks in at 11 over in the other room as well. If you have access to that, go check out at the info desk, and we'll see you later. Have a good break. Thanks, everyone.